Alright, here we go. The Short King's Grudge match. But put out a survey and y'all voted on two cartridges. The 308 Winchester versus the 7mm-08 Remington. Get ready for a battle of Peter Dinklage and Brad Williams duking it out. Here it is, Short King's Grudge match. I was actually kind of surprised by this one. They were a lot closer than I thought. But at the same time, they do have their strengths and their weaknesses. But both are solid. I had a couple criteria I wanted to do with this one. Number one, I did a 100-yard zero. Same scope height, barrel length, very similar type of powders for the cartridge itself. And then the other thing was common bullet type. Something you can expect to find for them pretty easy that would also have as close of a consistency. So for the 7mm-08, one thing you can definitely find is a 140 grain AccuBond. For the 308, a 150 grain AccuBond. Those are common bullets and actually pretty solid BCs for what they are. And so I forgot to write this down, but for the 7mm-08, it was N550, and for the 308, it was N540. So they're pretty similar. A little different burn rate, but not by a tremendous amount. I was trying to follow because both have the same maximum pressures, 61,000 psi. So I kept this as close to the same parameters. Something I like to do, if I'm going to make a comparison, I like to make the comparison as fair as possible. So duking it out from the left corner, let's start with a 7mm-08. Using the 140 grain AccuBond, you have a BC, a G1 BC of 0.485. You have a muzzle velocity of 2,875 feet per second. So it's no slouch. It's moving along pretty good. You have a muzzle energy of 2569. And then again, going back to what I said before, a 100-yard zero. You have a velocity of 2684, an energy of 2240 at 100 yards. At 200 yards, you have 2502 and 1945, and a drop of 3.3 inches. At 300 yards, you have a velocity of 2326 and an energy of 1682, and a drop of 12.2 inches. At 400 yards, you have a velocity of 2158 and an energy of 1447 with a drop of 27.6 inches. And rounding it off, you have at the 500-yard mark, 1,997 feet per second with 1,239 foot-pounds with a drop of 50.5 inches. So not a tremendously flat trajectory, but definitely not a slouch. It's actually pretty solid. Those are pretty good. And again, this is based on a 22-inch barrel. And the reason why I went with that is because it's one of the most common barrel lengths that you can find on the market. Just about everybody makes them. So it's a very common to find for 308 and 7mm-08. And you're really getting quite a good burn out of it. You don't need a 24-inch barrel. But it also gets a better burn than a 20-inch barrel. So that's what I went with. But I did the same exact parameters with the 308. For that, you have a 150 grain AccuBond with a G1 BC of 0.435. You have a muzzle velocity of 2864. So you're talking a difference of only 11 feet per second in your muzzle velocities. Like, they're right there on top of each other, virtually identical. And then you have your energy of 2,732. So because you have a virtually identical velocity, but you have 10 more grains of weight, you have a pretty good jump difference in your energies. So if you were to go, it's about 100 150 to 160. No, I take that back. So if you're at 200, yeah, so you're talking like 170 to 180 foot-pounds of energy difference at the muzzle. That's a pretty good gap. So out the muzzle, the 308 is going to definitely take the win for the initial slap. At 100 yards, you have a velocity of 2663 and 2362 for your energy. Again, a zero drop. At 200 yards, you have 2,461 feet per second with an energy of 2016 and a drop of 3.4 inches. So already your gap is closing significantly between your 308 and your 7mm-08. At 300 yards, you have 2267 feet per second and 1712 with a 12.5-inch drop. So your drops are really close, virtually identical. And again, you can see the gap just closing for your energies and your velocities. And actually, they're starting to open up. Actually, I take that back with the velocities. They're starting to open up because the 308 is slowing down a little bit more because it doesn't have as good of a BC, even though they're not that far off from each other. At 400 yards, you have a velocity of 2083 and an energy of 1445 and a drop of 28.5. So at 400 yards, you're talking a difference of about 70 feet per second, but virtually identical energies. So at 400 yards, they're both doing really well. Both will be ethical on elk at that range. It's borderline, but they will do that with a very similar drop. You're talking about within an inch of each other. So they're very, very close. And then at 500 yards, you have a velocity of 1906 and an energy of 1210 with a drop of 52.3 inches. So you're talking only a difference of 2 inches a drop. But the big thing where you're starting to notice this is even though it starts out with way more energy, it ends with less energy. I mean, 29 foot-pounds is not enough to shake a stick at to even make a comparison. However, the point is, it lost its velocity and its energy faster. But would that really matter if you're hunting deer out 500 yards? No, because 1,200 foot-pounds is still plenty adequate. And the other thing is both will be ethical on elk out to 400 yards. You just got to place your shots. At the end of the day, I mean, if you're talking about longer range shooting, the 7mm-08 would probably have an advantage with its diameter. But in no way, shape, or form is the 308 a slouch. It's a really good cartridge, and both would do the job just wonderfully overall, as long as you do your due diligence and stay within those reasonable ranges. 308 is a great target cartridge. They're accurate. So is a 7mm-08. But the one thing that people always forget about is every cartridge has its pros and its cons. So just because something is accurate doesn't mean it has the horsepower to be ethical on things like elk or moose at 600 or 700 yards. And before you go and say something like, well, I knew one guy, or I met this one guy, or somebody told me about this one guy. Yeah, there's a reason why they're only the one guy. They don't represent the majority. So, as a whole, I like personally sticking with the old school thought of roughly 1,500 foot-pounds on your bottom end for elk. And you can go down to like 1,000 for deer. So, if you're doing that, then both of these short kings would absolutely kill an elk without hesitation. So shoot straight, be honest about it, do your research, and at the end of the day, there is no such thing as a bad cartridge. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, hit that notification button. I'm looking to really grow this channel to make it as educational as possible, have fun comparisons. at the end of the day, if we're not helping each other out to become either better shooters or better hunters, then we're just fighting each other, and that's completely stupid and useless. There's enough problems in the world. The last thing we need to be doing is infighting, all because of some egos. Let that go. Let's come together and help each other out to become a better place, so for people to feel comfortable to come around and learn from. Well, that's all I have for tonight. The next video I'm going to discuss has to do with things like muzzle velocity and barrel length. So that's on the agenda, and then eventually talking about as well when it comes to rifling, the number of grooves, the type of grooving, how that can affect things like accuracy and even muzzle velocity. So that's on the agenda. If there's any suggestions about what you want to hear about, by all means, leave a comment. I'm always willing to accommodate and try to give some other ideas. All right, we'll talk to you again.